Hi, this is Professor Lipuma of the New Jersey Institute of Technology, making a recording for my technical communications class. This is material drawn from my text, Fundamentals of Undergraduate Education and Learning. This lesson is about interviewing and specifically thinking about a job interview you may go on. Now, the first thing we want to think about is, what do you need to consider? There are two different aspects of interviewing. Sometimes you are the interviewer, meaning that you are the one who is preparing to ask questions, getting information, drawing information out from people. That's not what this is really considering, because for most of what we're doing in technical communications at the college level, we're really focusing on you as the subject. And though an interview in which you ask questions is very important as a professional technical communicator doing field studies and surveys, that's something that is more advanced than our class will look at. But on the other side, there is many times where you will be asked questions, where you were being interviewed. And as I said, in particular, we want to think about the time when you've submitted your resume and they've called you back and asked you for an interview. And so there's several things that you want to think about as you go through this interview. The first thing you want to think about is, why are you there? What is your purpose for this interview? Is it to get the job? Is it to find out information about the company for an internship? Is it simply to practice your skills of interviewing? There are many different reasons why you are there. And so these purposes, these reasons behind why you're there, interact with your goal to have you set up different reasoning for being behind there. And being very clear about your motivations is very important. And sometimes you can come across as desperate if you really need this, and the reason you're there is because you need money, et cetera, et cetera. These ideas have to be clarified, and then you have to figure out if why you're there connects with why the target wants you there and what they're looking for. And that goes on to our next point, which is, who is involved and what do they expect? So you always, even though you have your own purposes and goals behind going on this interview, you need to think about who is going to be there. Is it going to be one person or a group of people? Is it a single interview, or is it a series of interviews over a single day or group of days put together? There's lots of different kinds of interviews that you may go on, and so investigating that helps you. And then what should you expect? Should you expect an informal sit-down over a lunch? Is it a set of tests that you have to complete before you even get to meet a person? Is it you with a bunch of other potential applicants waiting around in a room? There are many different ways that interviews are done, and so you need to investigate this so that you can better fit the package you present, which is yourself and your message being delivered, to the situation you find yourself in and the target or targets that are there. And so as we go forward with this, we want you to think about that these are the things you need to do in order to make your success most likely to occur. What makes you most effective at accomplishing your goal? And so to do that, we really have to think about, there are things you have to do before the interview, during the interview, and after the interview to increase your likelihood of success and to make yourself better for, if not that interview, the next interview. Because it's a learning process. As with anything else you do, the more you do it, the better hopefully you will get. So let's first talk about beforehand. Before you go on the interview, and perhaps even before you start the process of sending out a resume, you have to realize that your resume is the beginning of the interview because it's the first picture they have of you. So you need to research the field you're going into, the particular company, and if possible, the interviewer, to know what they're looking for, what they know. You never know what they might ask you or what they want to hear from you, so the more information you have, the more prepared you are, the better. So again, the next thing I want to think about is scouting the location. If it's in a place that you've never been before, probably the day before, the week before, you want to check out where it is you're going. Generally, how to get there, to make sure you get there on time, those kinds of things. But also, if it's in a hotel where they're doing group interviews, go to the hotel, make sure you look at the kinds of places and things so that you can do this. And this leads into dressing appropriately. Many times, your vision of how the interview will go is different than how it actually will be. Are you going to be in an office setting? For some jobs, they take you out into a shop floor or out into a plant. Other times, you're in a conference room or in front of a computer. Sometimes they expect you to be dressed in business attire. Other times, you have to have the right work equipment, a hard hat, and the right kinds of shoes. Dressing appropriately, again, matches back to the situation that you expect from that company and that target. And so dressing appropriately doesn't mean always wearing a suit. It means having the appropriate style of attire for the situation you intend to meet into. Now, this also brings us to the idea of being prepared. Sometimes you cannot always know exactly what's going to happen. And so you want to have some flexibility in what you're doing so that you can know when you get there, if it turns out to be something different than you thought, you have at least some flexibility. One of the problems with all this is that many people are extremely nervous. They're going on the interview for the first time or with the first company, or they really want the job. And so doing all this stuff just makes them more nervous. But what we're hoping is that thinking about this ahead of time can increase the likelihood of success and also make you feel more comfortable because you kind of know what's coming. It's not a blind look into a dark alley. And so the next thing is, well, what should you do when you're actually there? Well, as you go to your thing, of course, you want to be prompt. Now, for some people, prompt means getting there an hour ahead of time. For other people, this means, showing up 10 minutes beforehand. Usually, it's better to show up 5 to 10 minutes before and present yourself at the office. You never want to get there too early because then you're putting pressure on the interviewer, and you absolutely do not want to be late. There are some other little things with being prompt. This means also being prepared for the situation. And I don't mean the prepared, as we said in the last one, which is in advance of the interview, but when you go to the interview, there are many horror stories of people who had to quickly run to the bathroom and end up having problems and run into the guy they're interviewing, or they can't find them where the office is because they haven't scouted location. So promptness also says that you're ready for that interview when you're asked. Now, there's some other things that you may not think about as you come into this, and the idea here is that one of the things you want to do is bring a resume, and it may not be the same resume that you had when you first applied for the job. You may want to tailor the resume specifically for the interview, meaning there are some things that you know they're looking for or that have changed since you first created that resume, and so bringing a copy of your resume is always a good idea. Even if you bring the resume which you sent to the company, it's always good to have one in case your interview cannot find or never receive that resume. It helps as a set of talking points. And for you, this is something that's very important. The resume will provide information for the interviewer so that they can ask you questions about what you think are important. This doesn't mean they'll stick to what's on the resume, but everything on the resume is in play. And so everything on the resume should be something that you can answer questions about. The next thing, and again, we always say this, be professional. When you enter, extend your hand to shake their hand. Let them ask you to sit first. Look neat and clearly set up to be ready for the interview. Sometimes being professional means that you know what they should ask you. Many times, an interviewer, if it's an engineer, this may not be something they do all the time. Sometimes with internships, you've been sent to someone because they've said they wanted help, and so they're not used to doing that. They may not be an HR person. So part of being professional is knowing what should happen so that if the interviewer isn't sure about it, you can answer it. One of the toughest questions that you might get in an interview is the interviewer turns to you and says, "So what should I ask you?" You need to be prepared for these kinds of questions. There are other things about interviewing, which I'm not going to go into now, but one thing that you have to be clear about is to always make sure that you are ready with whatever information, whatever message you want to say, that is you feel most important and pertinent to your conversation with this person. When you have this interview set up, it is your job to impress them and leave a positive impression. In some cases, you will need to distinguish yourself from other candidates, but at a minimum, you always want to be ready with the vital pieces of information that you feel make you best suited for the position they are offering. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about is, sometimes you want to ask to take notes or at least show your interest in what's happening so that you're engaged and have your contact information ready. Hopefully this will begin at the very beginning of the meeting where as you shake their hand, you say hello and introduce yourselves, ask for them. If you have a business card, you can hand that to them and ask them for theirs. You want to engage with this person as a colleague and in a professional way so that they see you as someone that they can bring into their company. What you have to realize is that hiring a person is an investment at a minimum of 6 months. Because if they bring you on, you're not going to be productive at the beginning. And so you're really joining their team. And speaking in a way such as that, and showing that you can interface with them by speaking in the way that they speak, by understanding what they need and that you can provide it, is a good way to interface. The other reason that we want to talk about contact information is for the follow-up. So after you've gone through your interview, after you've gotten the interview completed, the last thing you want to do is follow up, because afterward, you're not done. Now, in some cases, they'll quickly call you or send you an email, but if you've received their card and contact information, you are very easily able to follow up with them. You should always try to send a thank you note, whether it be an email, a phone call, or a letter, sending them some acknowledgement of the fact that you're thankful for the time they spent with you and giving you that interview is always helpful, because even though you may not have gotten the position you interviewed for, making a positive impression can keep you in the running for other positions. In this thank you note, you may even say something such as, if I'm not qualified for this position, or if this position isn't available, I'm very interested in your company. I would like to interview for other positions in the future. Please keep my resume on file, or keep me in mind, or refer me to other people. There's lots of things you can say in furthering that contact. Sometimes the follow-up is also important, because in that interview, they may have said, well, there may be a second round of interviews. And so if after a week you haven't heard anything, a thank you note or an email allows you the opportunity to inquire about whether or not you are still in the running. Have they made a decision? When will the next interview be? In the end, you always want to be professional in these communications. Sometimes if it was a day-long event, or they sent you to a lunch, you can send a note or a thank you gift to a secretary or someone who set up parking or travel arrangements. But you always want to be careful that what you do is seen as ethical and correct by the target that you're interfacing with. Whatever you do afterward has to be seen in a positive light by them. One of the balances you face is that if you don't push at all, they may have forgotten about you. If you push too much, you may annoy them. And so it's a fine line you walk between asking for follow-up or another interview or progress and letting them get back to you in a reasonable amount of time. It is dependent upon the situation and the target. And so during the interview, one thing you may want to ask is, how soon will I hear from you? Or how many other people are you interviewing? Or are there other people up for this position? Something to give you an idea of when would be an appropriate amount of time to wait until you follow up and ask more. So, thank you.